Okay, and now for the part you've been waiting for, the calculator shortcut. Um, Here, again, remember, if you're doing the calculator shortcut, that's great. Use it to double check your answers. Use it on multiple choice. When you're doing free response, they still expect you to show the z-score calculation and the p-value. You really should be using the pooled pooled proportion and use that for the standard deviation. They want you to show that you know what you're doing. But that said, let's get to the calculator shortcut. We're going to press Stat and then scroll to Tasks, then scroll down to 2-prop z-test. Then you'll get prompted for x1, which is the number of successes, n1, the sample size for the first sample, x2 for the successes in sample 2, and n2 the sample size for sample 2. And you can see here are the numbers from my M&M example. Now, all of the above must be integers. And then you can scroll to the appropriate alternate hypothesis. In my example, I was expecting P1 to be greater than P2, so I scrolled to this one. Finally, go to Calculate and press Enter. And, oh, by the way, you do need to hit Enter on these alternate hypotheses to make sure it changes color there. When you're done, your p-value is denoted as p. So there's the p-value that we got, 0.333. And the hypothesized proportion is p hat. Now, if you want to see the graph that I have here, your calculator will actually draw it. Go ahead and rerun the 2-prop z-test, and instead of hitting Calculate, hit Draw. The graph only shows the z-score, which is right here, 0.314, and the p-value, which is primarily what you're supposed to report when you run a 2-prop z-test. So let's go ahead and take a look at this example with people who wore patches and attended a weekly meeting, and people who wore a patch but didn't go to meetings. And they're trying to stop smoking. So which group did better? Here they're trying to say, will a support group who meets regularly help people? So they're thinking actually group 1 will do better, and that kind of makes sense. So our null is that the groups are the same. Our alternate is group 1 proportion is higher than group 2, where P1 is a true proportion who stopped smoking after wearing the patch and attending a weekly meeting, and P2 is a true proportion who stopped smoking after just wearing a patch. Our plan is a 2-sample z-test for P, and in the previous lesson on confidence intervals, we already checked for conditions, so I'll move on. So let's go ahead and calculate our point estimate, which is P1 minus P2, and I get 0.102. Then I have to pool the sample together, put these two numbers together and those two numbers together, and I get the average proportion of people who stop smoking across both groups in our example is 0.25. So let's calculate the new standard deviation. Now I'm using the 0.25 for both the numerators. The denominators are both sample sizes, and I get a standard deviation of 0.0497. Now, remember, it might be tempting to put the 0.25 in for the z-score, but remember, that's P1 minus P2, and we're comparing that to 0 and then dividing by the standard deviation. I get a z-score of 2.05, which means, again, I strongly recommend drawing your normal. 2.05 is somewhere around here, and so that's the area I'm looking for, which is normal CDF 2.05 to 1,000. I knew that I wanted to go to the right because I was assuming that this difference is, or my alternate is that this difference is greater than 0 when I go group 1 minus group 2, so greater than is to the right. And I get a p-value of 0.020. So I can conclude that with a p-value of 0.020, that's less than the alpha of 0.05. We reject the null hypothesis that the true proportion is the same between the two, and we say there is convincing evidence that P1 is actually greater than P2. Remember to include this context in your free response answers. Oh, by the way, I did not say that the true proportion of those in group 1. Do you know why? I know the proportion in group 1, and I know the proportion in group 2. That's not what I'm really comparing. What I'm trying to compare is patch and meeting versus patch and no meeting. So be a little careful with your conclusion right there.